The New Zealand mass shooting at 2 mosques last month left 50 dead and shocked people across the world. As with other mass shootings, it brought up serious questions about security and religious intolerance. I sat down with Tahirah Amatul-Wadud, an attorney who is also on the board of the Council on American Islamic Relations of Massachusetts, to find out how the local community is dealing with these questions in the aftermath of the massacre in New Zealand.
Locally, the mosques around Western Massachusetts have been concerned, and you've noticed an increase in the amount of security, particularly around the Juma prayers, which are the Friday prayers, which are widely attended services. You also have many members of the community coming and standing, who are not Muslim, but coming and standing with the Muslims during their prayer service in solidarity. So there was even talk recently of a group of people getting together and making like a chain link around the mosque so that the Muslims can grieve and mourn together without being harassed. And all of those sentiments are so meaningful. And when you see them, they're so touching.
And to see people coming together, after such a tragedy. What types of incidents have you seen, being on the board of the organization, as far as, discrimination and hate crimes?
There's so much bullying in the schools. And I think that we noticed that in 2016, and we talked about it, particularly during the presidential election, where there was so much anti-Muslim rhetoric, anti-immigrant rhetoric, anti-minority rhetoric, anti-marginalized people rhetoric. And it hasn't gone away. So you still have children who are being bullied because of either their faith or their perceived faith or their immigration status. And our organization and local communities all across the Commonwealth continue to support students and their families at pushing back and making sure that children are safe. There are other things that happen, harassment at the mosques, houses of worship, that we still push back. And luckily, especially for us here in Western Massachusetts, we have a great contingent of law enforcement personnel and partnerships so that we never feel like we're alone in dealing with some of that, those attacks.
When you talk about that and you think about that, because obviously there have been shootings, at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, there was that shooting in Texas about 2 years ago now, and security is now on the table where it never was thought of that in a house of worship that you would have to worry about this. There, you have people going in to pray. And now these are real concerns. When you talk about they're thinking about security, what kinds of security?
Well, making sure that the people who come to the mosque are people who are friendly to the mosque. I can't help but to think of Dylan Roof and the execution of Black worshipers at the church. And he actually sat in Bible class with them the whole duration of the evening, only to get to the end and to massacre them. So you welcome the stranger, but you just never know. One of the things that I think is unique about houses of worship is that for most people of faith, there's a mandate that you welcome the stranger. There's a mandate that you keep the doors open. And I think what we're also seeing is the administration of local mosques, but I'm sure it's happening at local churches and local synagogues as well, are really coming to terms with what does it mean to welcome the stranger? How do we do that and keep our congregation safe at the same time? So there are some real meetings of the minds locally and internally around how that happens and what that looks like, because no one wants to be the one turning away a worshiper without justification, but no one wants to subject themselves to the risk of violence like we've seen.
Right, and I think that's a really great point, because of course you want to welcome the stranger, but at the same time, like, you're constantly scanning to see who's in there, right, which almost makes you suspicious, which is certainly, not what your faith is teaching you. Right. So when you're looking at different security measures, are there certain people that are kind of, the greeters at the door perhaps, and they're, shaking everyone's hands and making eye contact? Is that the kind of thing, like the practical steps that are being taken?
I think what people look for, particularly those who are tasked with keeping the folks safe who are coming in for service, is to, like you said, look at people in the eye. Are there any things that concern you? But no one is going to be overly aggressive in how they greet people who are coming. A lot of folks are familiar and they recognize them. Then there are other people who will say, I'm here from such and such a congregation and we're here to stand with you. And you really put as communities of faith, you really put your faith in the Almighty Creator and in the goodness of humankind to protect you. And I think that's what you see. That's quite different than thinking about safety in other contexts, thinking about safety in an academic context, thinking about it in a corporate context. In houses of worship, people lead with faith, and sometimes you make decisions also based on faith.
And have you heard from other interfaith leaders as far as what they are now doing? Because I know that there have been different workshops that have been conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, really looking at security in houses of worship. But have you been in touch with any other interfaith leaders on what they're doing?
What I'm noticing is that there are still lots of conversations. This is a big deal. It's a big decision to make around how you engage in security, where you get your training from. The Department of Homeland Security for a number of years has had trainings that would help houses of worship stay safe. So people are just exploring where are the best resources for safety training. And it is, it's requiring some soul searching, because you are debating whether or not to have, say, private armed security versus public armed security, or a combination of both, whether to have a certain type of training issued by different vendors. And these decisions are not made lightly. So what I'm seeing is it's a vibrant conversation. It's an actual conversation. And I don't think there's a wrong or right answer. I think the conclusions will be based on who and where and what community feels most comfortable with the ultimate decision.
Right, and I think that's upsetting to a lot of people that here we are at this point that you're saying, wait a second, there's going to be somebody armed, outside a mosque or outside a church or a synagogue. That really makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and yet it's a real unfortunate reality that we have to look at.
It is, and I mean, I've lived in Western Massachusetts since I was 9 years old. Took a trip to Times Square maybe about 15 years ago, and there's armed police officers standing in front of every bank. And so it was funny to me, because that was so not what I'm used to seeing, but it is a day-to-day experience right there in New York City. Post 9/11. In 2015 in Arizona, there were mosques that had protesters standing out in front of the mosque while people were coming to worship. Those protesters were armed protesters, making it a very hostile place for people to go and worship. And so these things exist throughout our country, and in these segments of the world, they're responding to them. I know that it would make me quite sad to go to Juma prayer on a Friday to see armed security personnel. That would make me very, very sad. But fortunately, we're not seeing any decrease in the numbers of people who are coming to worship, and I hope that remains the case. And I trust the decision makers as to what type of security they want to employ. But I just can't imagine that visual.
Right.
I just can't.
Now, as a mother, you were talking about in the faith community, we lead with faith, right? Yes. We rely on faith. How do you teach this to your kids, that this is kind of the new normal? Yeah. And how do you teach it, really to us as a broader community?
Yes. I have kids of all ages, but the two who are probably the most inquisitive are two little boys who are 12 and 10 years old. And they attend a small little Muslim school. And so they have an increased police presence at their school. And I wanted them to hear from me and from my husband about why that was and what that means. These kids are quite strong and resilient, but what I find myself doing is I go back in history. I talk about the Selma church bombing and the loss of little children who were just a few years older than their grandmother, my mother. And I try to put into context that this has been a struggle in our country for a very long time, but that people survive it, that people grow stronger together. And that's what we are in a contemporary basis. I try to show them the strength of our greater community, that at this point, Muslims are being protected by our neighbors. That is a newer experience, and that we are trying to model it and to show love and kindness towards each other and to reciprocate that.